Hello, and welcome to TP's Music Talk Podcast. My name is Ryan Ford.
And I'm Nick Replinger.
And you can find us at our website, tpmusictalkpod.wordpress.com.
And you can also find us at anchor.fm/TP Music Talk Podcast and other major podcasting platforms by searching for TP's Music Talk Podcast.
You can find us on other social media as well, like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr, and others by searching for TP Music Talk Podcast or for TP Music Talk Pod on Twitter. Just look for our logo.
And you can also email us at tpmusictalkpodcast@gmail.com.
We also have shared playlists on Apple Music and Spotify that you can check out by searching TP's Music Talk Podcast as well.
And don't forget to click the link in the description and leave us a voice message on Anchor. And feel free to leave us a message or a review anywhere you're listening. It really helps us out. And don't forget, donations are always appreciated. You can find a link to donate in the description of any of our episodes.
No part of our show can be reproduced without permission or written consent. Hey, welcome back to the show. And today we have kind of a special topic in mind, and it is probably going to take us a little while to get through this. It may even end up being a 2 or 3 parter.
But today we're going to be talking about, although not claiming to be experts at this, but we're going to try our best to talk about the history and influence of rock and roll.
Yeah, we're going to talk about kind of the origin, where it all came from, and try to get you caught up to like present day as far as rock and roll. We're not going to talk so much about like hip hop or any of the other influences throughout the past decades. We're going to try and stick just with rock throughout this episode.
Throw in our own opinions and influences, as even though we didn't grow up in the 50s or the 60s and we were only born in the 90s, how it still influences us and what an impact that the history of rock and roll has had.
Yeah, and I just want to rephrase one more time. We are not experts, and we do not honestly have time to go over everything that we even want to go over when it comes to all of these different bands that we'll be talking about.
Yeah, so if your anger's like, oh, why didn't you talk about this, or why didn't you talk about that? Well, maybe we can cover that in a different episode, but we're just going to try our best.
Yeah, so we apologize if, you feel like there's a band that should really be on this list and we didn't cover it. It's not necessarily that we forgot about them. It's just that we kind of are trying to condense it into what we can share with you over the next hour or two. So.
And honestly, there's probably like a few dozen artists that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into this. The first person that we're going to talk about is kind of the guy who started it all. I'm not going to give the introduction because I feel like Nick knows a lot more about this guy, so I will let him take it away.
All right, so at least in my opinion, I took a rock history class before, and this is kind of where they started with, was talking about Chuck Berry. And Chuck Berry, he was an artist from like the 40s and 50s, and I guess what I would say why he would be considered so crucial as a part of the history of rock and roll and why I kind of started with him is that because he kind of revolutionized on how the electric guitar was kind of used, because before the guitar was considered more of a rhythm instrument rather than a lead and solo instrument. And with his classic song that most people know is called Johnny Be Good. And just to kind of give you like of how it kind of influenced rock, I'm sure many of you are aware of the movie Back to the Future.
With that show.
Yeah, and so the part where Marty goes back to the past to try and make sure that his parents stay together so that he's not erased from history, and then try and get to Back to the Future, he has to play at his parents' high school dance. But basically, the guitarist, he hurts his hand, and so he has to play guitar in place for him. So while he says, oh, okay, well, I'm going to play the song for you guys. It's an oldie where I come from, but maybe not so much for you. And he starts playing Johnny Be Good, which was one of the very first songs ever to use the guitar as the lead instrument. And so basically, while he's in the middle playing the song and everybody's dancing, having fun, the guitarist who hurt his hand, the camera goes off to him backstage where he's calling his cousin, and he goes, Chuck, this is your cousin, Marvin Berry. You know that new sound you've been looking for? Well, listen to this. And he raises the phone in the air to hear Marty, going all rock star with the song. And they're kind of, referencing how that Marty McFly influenced Chuck Berry to use the guitar as a solo instrument rather than a rhythm instrument. And so that's kind of a little bit of a homage to Chuck Berry and how just influential he was to music and how it kind of influenced later into rock and roll.
Yeah, and I feel like everyone has probably seen Back to the Future, and that is just such an iconic scene, and it's so memorable. And I mean, maybe you guys didn't even know that that's what that was referencing. You know, where Marty is playing the solo, and he picks up the phone, and he's like, "Chuck, you've got to hear this. This is that sound you've been looking for." That is, I don't know. It was just such a cool part of the show, and I'm so glad that Nick brought that up so that we could talk about it with you guys, because that just kind of shows how influential Chuck Berry was as a songwriter and as a musician, because he started the whole guitar as the lead instrument. I mean, he was one of the very first people to do it. And so that's why we wanted to start out by talking about him, because everything else that comes after this uses the guitar as a lead instrument in most of their songs. So
yeah, and so then going on, Chuck Berry, he also influenced a lot of different artists, that also are considered very influential in today's music. Like, I actually was scrolling in Facebook the other day, and there's a Facebook account for John Lennon, and they like to post a lot of things that he did in history, and it was a picture of John Lennon playing on stage with Chuck Berry and his band, and this is what John Lennon had to say about Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry is one of the greatest influences on earth. So is Little Richard, so is Bo Diddley. There isn't one white group on earth that hasn't got their music in them, and that's all I ever listened to. That's coming from what is considered one of the greatest musicians of the 21st century, saying about Chuck Berry and his bandmates.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's undeniable that Chuck Berry started something very special when he came around. Just the way that he crafted his music, it was very different and very influential. I feel like this is a good lead into the next artist we want to talk about, which is Elvis. And the reason we want to talk about Elvis is he pulled from a lot of the influences that Chuck Berry put out there. Oftentimes would use the guitar as a lead instrument. The big thing that we want to specify with him, he really kind of broke down racial barriers when he came out, and he was also a very charming guy, and he was very influential to the culture of rock and roll, as well as taking different cultures and races and mixing them into music. And he had a very big TV influence. He also sold the most platinum records of anyone ever. So, yeah, and Nick knows a lot about him too, so I'm going to give it back to him.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm a huge Elvis expert, but definitely one thing that I remember learning about Elvis that I didn't know when I took my music history class, is that Elvis almost didn't become the king of rock and roll, and that he was also known for are some of his dance moves, the swinging of the hips. But apparently when he first was on television and did that iconic hip swing, it was a total outrage that he did that. It was considered extremely sexual, and so after that his career was almost completely gone and destroyed, and no one would play his music or invite him on their TV shows or have him play. But then, of course, what was the equivalent of today's, like the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon or something like that, was the Ed Sullivan Show. And Ed Sullivan was kind of hesitant at first to bring Elvis on, but he decided, okay, I'll give this kid another chance, let him redeem himself. And so he let him come on his show, and he played a few songs. But the part I find most humorous about that is that on the Ed Sullivan Show, they would not film him below the waist because they were afraid that he might do something and then upset the public.
Which is hilarious. I mean, especially when you look at how culture is now. I mean, nobody would bat an eye at someone doing a hip swing like that.
Yeah, and if you were nobody and you made it on the Ed Sullivan Show, you would just basically just take off. I mean, it was the same thing with the Beatles. As soon as they got on the Ed Sullivan Show, they grew in popularity not just over there in Great Britain, but around the entire world.
Yeah, and so, I mean, and Elvis just kind of brought everyone together, too. I mean... And so I guess at that point, it's a good time to talk about the Beatles, because while all of this was happening, not too long after, you had the British invasion. You had all of these people from Britain coming over and bringing their music and their influences. And I feel like without Elvis, people may have not been as open to those new artists coming over. And so this is when we get in on the Beatles and we get to talk about them a little bit. I mean, we're never going to have enough time to talk about everything that they did.
Well, I'm sure we could easily do multiple episodes about the Beatles and still not even cover half of it. But the reason why, at least I personally feel why the Beatles are so important is because they were the first to do a lot of things. Kind of like how it was important how Chuck Berry kind of revolutionized the guitar. They revolutionized a lot of the way that music was written because they were the first to do so many different things. Like first, they became popular with their more poppy rock and roll, happy-go-lucky music like She Loves You or Help, some of their earlier singles. But then as soon as it became more and more popular, they learned that they were so famous and so popular and people loved their music so much, it didn't matter what they wrote, people would buy it. And so they took advantage of that and they started experimenting with all different kinds of things. And then you have amazing songs that, because of that experimentation, you have songs like Yesterday, which is considered the most successful song, I think, of the 21st century because it's been covered and re-recorded more than over 2,000 times. There's over 2,000 different versions of the song Yesterday that you can download today on the internet right now. And another reason why it's so important is because it was also the first song ever to not only use the bass as a lead instrument as well, but it was also the first to not have any rhythm in the song as well. And to, instead of having the rhythm in the background, they have strings in the background as they sing the song too.
Another song that comes to mind for me that I think is super unique that's by the Beatles is Eleanor Rigby, because you have strings playing. I think it's like violins and it's just so different, and especially back then it would have been a very unique, and it's almost kind of like melancholy or maybe even ominous in a way, and yet it's so thought-provoking and such an amazing and unique song. And the Beatles, they started so many new things when it came to music and how it's produced, how lyrics are written. They also had the first like concept album. You had Sgt. Pepper, Sgt. Pepper's
Lonely Hearts Club
Band. So I mean, they just did so much when it came to I don't know. They're like the foundation of everything in a way.
Yeah, and I also want to touch on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band because, concept albums are great and they have that idea or function that they're supposed to be telling a story or have some kind of idea. But for me, honestly, when it comes to concept albums, I still believe, even though it was the first concept album, it's still, in my opinion, the king of concept albums. Because the Beatles, they were so famous and so popular, they were like, we want to write more music, but we don't want to go on tour. And that's why they wrote Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. They wrote that album so it could go on tour for them.
Yeah, and I mean, it came with like tickets to the show. I mean, not real tickets, of course, but like it was so much a concept album that they even included tickets in the record. So when you open it up, there was tickets to go to the show. And it
came with a whole, like itinerary and all that stuff. And then when you listen to the beginning, of the album, it says, it's kind of like you're watching, the beginning of the show. It's like it was 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play, and it's like a conductor introducing the band. It's like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and you hear applause and, some fun music like they're about to start the show.
Yeah.
And then later on in the song, they go into this like, oh, you've been such a lovely audience. We love to take you home and say little cliches like we'd hear during a live show. Like it was like literally you were at a Beatles concert when you listened to that album.
Yeah, like you start the album and it's like a big welcome wagon, this ballad of just like, hey, the show is starting.
Yeah, and the whole thing, they just go into song because when it starts with Sgt. Pepper's, then it goes straight into with the song written by Ringo Starr, A Little Help from My Friends, and it just keeps on going and going.
And so, I mean, they kind of started it all in a way. And, I mean, it's so hard because there's so much we could say about them. But, I mean, what would you say some of your favorite Beatles songs are?
Wow. Well, if I know even we're going to ask that question, I would have thought about it. That is a really hard question. I love them so much. But I guess you could say that Yesterday is definitely a top favorite because it is kind of a little bit of a sad love song, but I mean, the music is absolutely beautiful and the lyrics are very well thought out. Let's see, what else? I mean, then there's also fun songs like Octopus's Gardens that are, it's like, where on earth did they come out? Well, yeah, definitely drugs would influence those songs, but there's so many songs going through my head right now. I actually went and saw the movie Yesterday, which is about this guy where he wants to be a famous musician, he doesn't get anywhere, and then all of a sudden the power goes out around the world. He's hit by a bus and wakes up in the hospital, and he's the only one who remembers the Beatles. No one else, remembers them. Like they never existed, but he remembers all their songs, and so he becomes considered the greatest musician or songwriter to have ever lived because he passes off all the Beatles songs out on his own. And just as you go on and watching the entire movie, it's like, oh yeah, I love that song. That's a great song too. I mean, like there's so many greats, like Ryan said, Eleanor Rigby, or there's The Long and Winding Road, or
Day Tripper,
or Hey Jude. I mean, it's kind of hard to just pinpoint a favorite song by the Beatles because also their music is so unique and it evolves. I mean, if you listen to their early stuff, like She Loves You, all the way down to like a later song like Yellow Submarine or Norwegian Wood, their songs are so different. I mean, like there's just no comparison. It's like they evolved because, like I said before, they became so famous, they could do whatever they wanted, so they experimented a lot. That's why they also went all the way to India and had like their own like spiritual awakenings, especially George Harrison.
Yeah, and I mean, drugs were part of a lot of what they did, but also like songs that you would think they would have been on drugs to do, like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, that was not influenced by drugs at all, right?
At least that's what they claim. So I have this, a lot of my knowledge comes from this book my mom bought me for Christmas a long, long time ago. And so I learned a lot from this book, but basically there were some songs they would just come out and say, yeah, that song was about drugs. Like one of those songs that they said it was about drugs was Yellow Submarine.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because there was, I guess, this hallucinogen that they would take that was a yellow pill, and they nicknamed them the Yellow Submarines. And then other songs where people are so sure it was about drugs, but they denied are about drugs is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. John Lennon claims that it was not about drugs and that his son Julian just came up to him one day with a picture that he had drawn, and he's like, oh, who's that? And it's like, oh, that's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And then, John Lennon wrote the song about that. But some people are like, yeah, no, it's a cover-up story because Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, LSD.
I know, yeah, it's surprising. I mean, I thought it was surprising when I heard that. Some songs that stand out to me, Blackbird, of course.
Blackbird, yeah.
Oh, let's see.
Penny Lane.
Oh, Penny Lane. I really like Yesterday, too. I mean, who doesn't like that song, honestly?
Yeah, for sure.
So good. Hard Day's Night. I mean, it's endless. The list is endless of good songs by the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And, they were very mainstream, but they experimented a lot too.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of the music that we enjoy today with all the different things, the Beatles, some people say the Beatles are over and that they don't like the Beatles, but the thing is, without the Beatles, they would not have the music that they have today without the Beatles. And they're like, no, they didn't. It's like, well, what do you like about those artists? And they'll name something. It's like, well, you can find that in that song by the Beatles or something like that. And it's just like, because they were the first ones to experiment with that. And like, they even went as far to experiment with crazy things with atonal music. And like, what atonal music is, there's regular music, it has a melody and it flows, you can sing along to it. That's called tonal music. And then there's other music that doesn't necessarily have a melody, and that you can't necessarily sing to, and that's called atonal music. And kind of like how to distinguish between the two, like if you think about the song Yesterday by the Beatles, you have that, oh, I believe in yesterday, it has that melody that you can sing along to. But if you listen to atonal music, like a common place to hear that kind of music is within soundtracks, especially in horror soundtracks. Like, when the famous shower scene in Psycho, when, he's about to stab her with the music, you hear that, yan, 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 yan. It's like, that's something, it doesn't have a melody, but it's still music. And that's atonal music, because it's not something you can necessarily sing with a melody.
Yeah, another thing with atonal music is a lot of the time it uses the chromatic scale. And the chromatic scale is a scale that's known as being something that is kind of almost like off-putting when you hear it, and it creates like tension with people and can cause a little bit of anxiety. That's kind of some of the music that they were experimenting with, and nobody had really done anything with that type of music before.
Yeah, and the Beatles, they used a lot of their experimental music dealt with a lot of atonal music. Like, I think it's called Revolution 9, where they used a lot of that atonal music in their experimentation. Like, they would just drop things inside the piano and then try and play all these weird chords, and they would also play things backwards, and it just came up with these really strange sounds.
Well, and I feel like before we move on, we should also touch on it. They have broken so many records.
Yeah.
Like, so many. And I think that Ariana Grande was the first person to break one of their records just recently in the past, 2 or 3 years. And it was a big deal because nobody generally breaks the records that the Beatles have set.
Which record was that?
I would have to read into it. I was not prepared record with that today, but I think it was something like she had
like the top 3, right?
Yeah, three or four songs on the top charts, something like that, which broke one of the Beatles records.
Yeah, but still, though, the one that I remember learning about this record in my music history class too is that, which Ariana Grande still hasn't beaten, is that the Beatles had all the, when you had the Hot 100, and then, you know, they had like the 100, the 50, and then there's 20, 10, and then 5. And the Beatles at one point had all of their songs, were the top 5 were all Beatles songs at one point.
Yeah, which is just crazy. I mean,
and according to my teacher, that is a record that will never ever be broken again.
Yeah, or at least would be very, very difficult. I mean,
yeah. I mean, with Ariana Grande doing, you know, the top 3 or 4, you know, breaking that record, which is still incredibly impressive, I kind of doubt she would be able to break that one, because she would have to write a whole nother, you know, top 5 songs to fill those things out.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I wouldn't say it's impossible. I mean, anything is possible, and music is always changing, but oh my gosh, like, it's pretty much impossible.
Yeah, well, the thing is,
there.
Like, with today's music, how it is today, the Beatles were the foundation of all that music. I mean, any artist would have to come up with something completely and totally new, and at least in my opinion, to break that record.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of you out there right now screaming into your phones or whatever you're listening on, well, what about the Rolling Stones? I mean, they did a lot too. What are you guys doing? What are you talking about? Yeah. Well, they are next. Yeah. So, hey, I don't know. Do you feel like it's a good point where we can...
Yeah, I think we've covered the Beatles enough. If we keep talking, we'll just keep talking more and more, because I could talk about them forever.
Right. So, let's move on to the Rolling Stones. They, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, are kind of the other half of the coin when it comes to the Beatles and the British invasion. They were so big as well and had many records of their own. And they were known as kind of the first hard rock band to ever come out. They were a little bit more grimy than the Beatles and had a slightly different sound, but were still very popular in the mainstream. Yeah, I mean, my knowledge with the Rolling Stones isn't too big. I don't have...
No, mine's not anywhere near as big, because I actually don't care that much for the Stones. I mean, there's maybe 2 or 3 songs I like by them, and that's about it. And I'll say, as you heard before, I love so many of the Beatles songs. So for me to be able to talk the same about the Stones, I probably would not be able to do them justice either.
Yeah, so I mean, we aren't going to be able to do them much justice here, but we did want to mention them because they were, I mean, some people will say that they were more influential than the Beatles. I would say that it's probably about 50-50. I personally am more of a Beatles fan, but Rolling Stones, they deserve to be up there.
Yeah, I could probably just sound biased, but I think, you know, the Stones are definitely influential, but I don't think they were anywhere near as influential as the Beatles.
Yeah, but I mean, people get in arguments about that all the time. I mean,
that's why I'm saying, you know, I could probably just sound biased because I like the Beatles more.
Yeah, and I mean,
But the thing is, like, you know, when you learn about them, I know I keep mentioning my rock history class, but that's where I'm getting a lot of my information for this podcast because of what I learned. But when we had a whole week where we talked about the Beatles, the Stones, that was probably maybe 20 minutes in one class period.
Which, I mean, if you were to ask my opinion would be that the Beatles were more influential. But I still think that the Rolling Stones deserve to be up there, you know, in the list of the greats, the originators of rock, and I think he would agree.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, I don't want to downplay them because, you know, without them, maybe we never would have had the progression of rock that led into metal and heavy metal and grunge and all those other genres that I enjoy in the subgenres of rock and roll.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too. Like, even though the Beatles started so much, I feel like Rolling Stones, they helped push it even further, especially when it came to hard rock, because the Beatles, they were a little bit more easy to listen to, I would say.
Yeah.
Whereas the Rolling Stones were a little bit heavier and helped push that forward.
Yeah, and also, you know, a lot of the Stones music had a little bit more of an agenda, I would say. I mean, I won't go much into that, but, you know, I definitely feel like the Beatles, they were just experimenting with music, having fun with it, and the Stones was just all about rebellion.
Yeah, they were a very rebellious band, and I feel like that's why people kind of gravitated to them as well, as they had that rebellious feel, whereas the Beatles did not as much.
Yeah, because like when you look at old footage of a Beatles concert versus a Stones concert, the Beatles was all just, you know, girls all dressed up and dolled up, you know, just screaming their heads off. If you look at old footage of an old Rolling Stones concert, you know, just a bunch of people, and like they would have inflatable penises and all things like that, you know, it was a completely different scene. Like one group is like, oh, you go with your friends and your parents know about it, and maybe the Stones. It's like, my parents don't know that I'm here,
Yeah.
That's at least how I would compare when I've looked at, because I like looking up old concerts and videos of those bands back in the day and to see what it was like, because they happened way before I was born.
Well, and maybe this is kind of a good example of what you just described. For instance, my grandmother, she is a huge Beatles fan, and I believe she may have even went to some of their concerts. I don't know for sure, but I do know that she is very into the Beatles. But she never really listened to the Stones because they were kind of, in a way, considered like taboo. And like she wouldn't even listen to Queen, which we will be talking about a little later in this podcast. So I mean, I think that kind of shows you like how the culture was in certain places back in the day. Beatles were a lot more in the mainstream, I feel like.
Yeah, like here's an analogy I just came up with. If you were to, let's say you have a teenage daughter who grew up in the 60s, and let's say she brought home Paul McCartney back when they had their suits and their bowl cuts, your parents probably would have fawned over and like, oh yeah, he's a great choice, versus over, maybe she brought home Mick Jagger. You'd probably be like, what is this hooligan doing with my daughter?
Yeah, like,
at least that's how I kind of view when it comes between the Beatles and the Stones.
Yeah. But both were very influential, very important. And I think from there, the next one on the list, some people might think it's kind of a weird place to put this band, but I think that they are deserving of this spot, and I think that they are very underrated.
Oh yeah, they're definitely underrated. I don't think it's a weird spot because they're also a big part of the British invasion too, with the Beatles and the Stones.
Yeah, it's so true.
And who are they, Ryan?
It is The Who, actually. Oh, The Who.
Yeah, who?
Yeah. The Who.
Yeah, wait, who's on first? Sorry. What's on second? I don't know who's on third,
Lots of dad jokes today for you. Bear with us. But yeah, the Who, they have some incredible songs that no one really talks about. Well, and then they're even still popular today. I mean, they've just been around for the longest time, and they have all these incredible songs, and it seems like nobody really knows about them anymore.
Even though I even just had this conversation before we recorded this, I was like, oh yeah, but my personal favorite song, which is one of their most famous, is called Baba O'Reilly. And Ryan's like, Baba O'Reilly, I don't think I've ever. It's like, that one. And it's like they use it in movies and commercials all the time. So I pulled it up on YouTube, and the moment it started playing, because the intro was 30 seconds long before they even start singing.
And I was like, I've heard this. I recognize this right away.
Yeah. So I mean, like, if you don't know who the Who are, I know you've heard their music before. Pause it, go to YouTube, type in Baba, Baba O'Reilly by the Who, and just press play, and I know you will have recognized it.
Yeah, or the one that's, who are you? Who?
I really want to know. No.
Yeah, that one is amazing. Sorry for our terrible
hey,
singing.
Who are you calling a terrible singing voice?
Okay, I'm sorry for my terrible singing.
No, I'm not that great of a singer anyways either.
But hopefully you know what song I was referencing there.
Well, when you say Who, I mean, I think it's obvious that it's the Who.
Yeah, well, very true, very true. I'll give you that.
Yeah, but so yeah, there's the Who. We wanted to give them a mention because they are kind of an underrated band because they're so great. They have a lot of good music. Even, do they have any concept albums? I can't remember. But
I don't know. I'm not too tailored on their discography, but I definitely should look into that.
Yeah, but anyways, a great band. Go and check them out if you haven't heard who the Who are.
As well as these other ones we've talked about as well. I mean, even Chuck Berry has some songs that are very iconic. That are
even more than just Johnny B. Good.
Yeah, that are worth listening to. So the next one that we want to get into, and I think a lot of people will be happy that we're talking about this one. Very popular, Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, and Led Zeppelin, they're pretty important because they're considered one of the first heavy metal bands. I know I was like, what? Led Zeppelin as heavy metal? But yeah, by definition, they were the first.
Yeah, back in the day, they tore it up. And they also had some concept albums. They did things with the guitar that are still amazing to listen to today. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
The solos and I don't know. There's so much you can say about Led Zeppelin. I mean,
yeah, I've never even heard of Led Zeppelin. I'm sure you've heard some of this because a lot of their music is very popular in movies, just like some of the Who's music is today. I mean, like there's Kashmir.
Oh, Kashmir is incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Or the Immigrant Song.
Yes.
I think the most recent movie I've seen that was in Thor Ragnarok, so it's their music's still being used today. And
Stairway to Heaven.
Oh yeah,
another
such,
beautiful.
Every person who plays the guitar knows at least the intro to that song. So
I have a quick story about that one. A friend of mine, I guess when he was in high school, they would do like ward dance parties for his church, and the bathroom song was always Stairway to Heaven, because it's a pretty long song. I think it's like 6-7 minutes, something like that. And so in the middle of the dance, they would have a bathroom break and they would play Stairway to Heaven over the intercom, and you knew like when it was getting close to being over, oh, I've got to rush back into the auditoriums and dance some more. Anyway, I just always thought that was a super funny story. And another fun thing with Stairway to Heaven is I've actually heard that if you play that one backwards on the guitar, it's supposed to be a bad omen or bad luck.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so don't go playing that song backwards, because it's not good.
Oh, interesting.
If you're superstitious like that. But
I'm a little stitious, but
yeah, me too. I mean, I don't know how much stock I put in that stuff, but
I was being sarcastic.
You know what?
No, from The Office, it's like, I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious.
Man, I love The Office. Sorry, we're getting off topic on a tangent.
Well, this is kind of how a little sidetrack, but this is kind of how Transmitter came about. Ryan and I would always be talking about music, and always, it's just in our everyday conversations. But of course, other things would come up with watching TV shows or culture or things that we could just bond over, and that's kind of where the idea for Transmitter came from. Like, we would talk about music all the time, and we decided, well, why not just record it and put it on the internet and do this thing for fun.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, every day that, whenever Nick is over or I'm over at his place, we are always talking about, the majority of stuff we talk about seems like it has to do with music. And I mean, Nick has his own band that he's in, and I've always been passionate about music, and that's why we decided to do this. And I mean, hopefully you guys are enjoying it, and if nothing else, hopefully you're seeing the passion that we have for it.
Yeah, and that's why we're talking about all these different bands. And if we miss one that you absolutely love, and that's why we apologize, because there's so much to talk about, because there are just so many great bands that we just couldn't even possibly begin to touch, because that's way too much content.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was some that we were considering putting on this list, and we're like, well, we'd better leave it out. I mean, I know at least in my head I was doing that,
Mm-hmm.
So, but moving on from Led Zeppelin, is there anything else that you wanted to?
No, I think that's the basics. A lot of great music, some good concept albums, and heavy influencers of heavy metal.
Yeah. Also, sorry, I just thought with all of these bands that we've discussed so far, they are also very well known for their live talent and just how well they could sing live. When you look back at the Beatles music, for example, and Nick was telling me this a week or two ago, like, you might not think that the vocals are anything very intricate or
spectacular.
Yeah, like they don't come off like, say, I don't know, what would you consider some of the great vocalists now? I mean, a lot of people think Mariah Carey is up there.
Or Whitney
if she
Houston.
does an auto-tune or, sorry, Mariah Carey. But anyway, so all of these bands that we've talked about so far, they are very good live as well. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
I mean, there's lots of bands where they were super popular, super influential, but they weren't that great as singers. Like one artist that comes to my mind is Tom Petty. He did not have a good singing voice, but yet he was this famous rock star, and when he passed away, everybody's like, no, we lost one of the greats. Or Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan cannot sing. Like, I'd even seen him live, and of course, he was a lot older when I saw him live, but his voice was absolutely trash, and I didn't even enjoy it that much, because he didn't even play all his old stuff. He had written a new album, only played from his new albums, and you could not understand his voice. It was like but I mean, not to bash on Bob Dylan. He's more known for his writing style and his lyrics. But sure. But yeah, so you don't necessarily have to be an amazing singer to be a great musician.
Yeah, and I mean, exactly. Like, even though they might not have sounded great, people still would love to listen to them, even if not for their vocals, for the lyrics or what they were sharing with the world. So
yeah, no, even just with their instruments.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so the next band we want to talk about, I think they heavily influenced a lot of psychedelic rock, and also they really perfected the idea of a concept album, was Pink Floyd.
Oh yeah, they've got to be one of my personal favorites. I mean, they did so much to influence what would be progressive rock, progressive metal. Progressive rock was around at the time, but Pink Floyd really brought it into the mainstream, and I mean, who knows, maybe progressive, those more progressive bands, they might not be around today if not for Pink Floyd.
Yeah, because they would just do such crazy things. Like, one of my favorite things to do when I'm actually when driving with people and I know they don't have the same music taste as I do and they don't know rock very well. There's a song called "The Great Gig in the Sky." Do you know that one?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
No, so it starts off with a very soft, melodic piano. It's like doo-dum, 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 and it's very nice and pleasant to listen to. But eventually, the lead singer, I forget his name, but he just starts singing, going and people, and she goes and just like he just starts screaming in the song, and like people are like, what on earth are we listening to? And I just love to see the reaction of the people's faces, and it just goes to show just how different, how psychedelic, and maybe they were on drugs when they wrote that song, but I love listening to it because it's something different, it's something unique.
Rest in peace, headphone users. That's all I have to say about
I'm sorry,
that.
I couldn't tell
I loved it.
without any justice if I didn't do the weird no.
And Nick actually did a pretty good job there. That is kind of what it sounds like. But yeah, I mean, and they had songs like kind of creepy sounding songs. Like if you've ever heard "Is There Anybody Out There?" It starts out and it's kind of just this mellow song, and all of a sudden this person, he comes in with the vocals saying, "Is there anybody out there?" But every time he gets to the end of the sentence and says "anybody out there," there's these echoes of other people saying "anybody out there." And so they have some just very kind of creepy, trippy songs, and it usually has to do with an overall arching theme. They were also very rebellious in their own way. I mean, "We Don't Need No Education."
Another Brick in the Wall.
Yeah, which I love that album. It's so good. The Wall.
Oh yeah, I mean that song in general is just really great. It was actually one of the first songs I ever heard by them, and just the ending is so weird because they have like this Irish guy. Because I guess that song's kind of protesting how I guess the education system was. I don't know, in that decade or previous time when they were in school or something like that. But they were kind of just finding out how I guess there was a little bit of abuse when it came to disciplining. And you hear this like Scottish Irish guy going, "If you don't eat your meat, you can't have any pudding. How can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat?"
Yeah, they had some interesting vocals on their albums, and they had so many different interesting sounds that they brought in, and I think that's kind of what made them progressive, is they would bring in stuff that you would never hear anywhere else. Another album that we should probably talk about is The Dark Side of
the Moon.
Yes.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah.
Dark Side of the Moon. It's another concept album, and a strange thing with this one that I found out a while back. So, The Wizard of Oz, if you turn down the volume all the way...
Oh, I've heard about this. I never tried it. But
yeah, I've never done it either, but if you turn down the volume all the way and mute The Wizard of Oz, and you start The Dark Side of the Moon right when the movie starts, it will play through the movie, and right as the album ends, the movie will end as well. Like, it's the same amount of time, and people even say that the music kind of coincides with The Wizard of Oz in a weird way, which I don't think that was necessarily intentional, but definitely a cool little...
Coincidence?
Yeah, coincidence with that album.
Oh, coincidence, right?
Right, and maybe it's not, you don't know. So Pink Floyd, they are amazing. They're amazing live as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good touch on Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
And then next what we wanted to talk about was going, because, they're kind of Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and part of the British invasion, and also just rock and progressive rock and psychedelic rock. But we also want to talk on a couple other bands, kind of introduce more of the punk scene, like The Cure and the Pixies.
Yeah, and The Cure definitely is a little older than the Pixies. Pixies came out in the 90s, I believe. Cure, I believe, started out in the 70s. But yeah, they were part of the British invasion as well, and they brought that whole punk rock sound into the mix. And I genuinely feel like without them, we wouldn't have had the rise of punk music in like the 2000s or the 90s with, we were talking about Green Day and Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance. They kind of drew on some of those same types of sounds. And so we felt like we had to at least bring up The Cure, and we wanted to throw the Pixies in there too, because they were more recent in the 90s, but still kind of had that similar sound to The Cure in a way, some of their stuff.
Yeah, and I think The Cure's they're kind of important because, especially with Robert Smith and his interesting look, I really think his look with his heavy makeup and his big voluminous hair and all that stuff really influenced a lot of the hair bands of the 80s.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and definitely influenced the whole emo trend later on, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure. And definitely Kiss was a heavier influence in that, but of course Robert Smith, just with his look. I mean,
yeah, very
I've
iconic.
only seen a couple of his music videos, but every time, his face is like just caked white, and he's got lipstick and mascara on, and his hair is always just waving in the air, and he's typically always wearing black. Sometimes he wears other things, but I think that just his image also just influenced another era that led into the 80s as well.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, there's so many bands even today that use makeup and dress in dark clothing. I mean, it's become a staple really for a lot of bands. And not saying that The Cure was the first band to do that, but definitely helped influence all of it, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
iEngraveStuff.com is a local engraving service based in Linden, Utah. If you want an amazing engraving done on one of your personal belongings, get in touch with one of their specialists today. You might meet McKay, who is one of the main brains of the operation. He's also one of our close friends and the drummer of Nick's band Blix 10. Follow their Instagram page to stay in touch with the latest news for iEngraveStuff. And be sure to type in TP10 in all caps in the promo code box when you're shopping online at their store.
I really enjoy their work. They make engraving look easy when it actually has quite a few factors that come into play. Many things can switch and cause a problem, but the pyros at iEngraveStuff have it down to a science. They are continually improving their craft, which has been cool to see. If you want in on this action, look up iEngraveStuff on Instagram, Facebook, and iEngraveStuff.com.
Yep, that's the letter I,
and then engrave,
and then stuff.
iEngraveStuff.com.
Next, we wanted to talk about Queen because we feel like...
And we're not talking about the Queen of England.
Yes, no. No, I mean, we should do an episode on the Queen of England.
Yeah, is she a real headbanger?
Yeah, I'm sure she is. I bet she got into rock music at some point. Maybe she listens to heavy metal every day.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure now we're going to be invited by the royal family and be beheaded now.
Probably. We are so sorry. Had to throw it in there.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's enough of the dad jokes for me.
So, Queen. Queen, we wanted to talk about them next because we feel like, well, at least I feel like they're kind of the aftermath of the British invasion.
Yeah, but they're definitely rock. I mean, like We Will Rock You, but then they also have a lot of elements of pop in them as well.
Oh, yeah. They experimented with so many different sounds. If you've seen that recent movie, I think it is...
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Bohemian Rhapsody. There's a part in the trailer, Nick and I were just talking about this, but, he says, next comes the operatic section.
Yeah. And Brian May is like, what? I was like, yeah, right. Okay, yeah, sure. Whatever you say,
yeah.
Freddie.
So, I mean, Freddie Mercury, he played with so many different sounds, but still kept that, clean-cut 80s grandiose vibe, I guess.
Yeah. And then, of course, another reason why they were so big is that Freddie Mercury had such a unique voice and talent.
Oh, yeah. All of it was supposedly because of his front teeth, right?
Oh, yeah, because he also had a very large range. I forget exactly how large it was, but he could go very high and a little bit low. And then also a big thing, because apparently, I guess, during his autopsy, they studied his mouth. And the way that his teeth were formed helped him to hit, certain notes and ranges that most people could not ever achieve. And so Freddie Mercury, I guess he knew this because I remember hearing stories of how when he became famous, people offered hey, we can fix your teeth for you, I'm willing to pay for it, but Freddie Mercury would always turn them down because he knew it would affect how he would sound.
Yeah. Another interesting thing about Queen is I don't feel like they were super popular when they came out and when they were
they kind of struggled at first.
Yeah, but they've only grown more and more popular since then. I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody, I feel like everybody kind of knows about that song, and if you haven't heard it, definitely check it out. It is an incredible song, and it captures so many different sounds of rock. I mean, and it does have an operatic section in it, and they experimented with opera and some other sounds that other bands prior to them had not, and definitely worth being on this list for a lot of reasons. So
yeah, for sure. And plus, they have so many songs that people love and still sing to today. I mean, everybody loves Bohemian Rhapsody. Everybody loves We Will Rock You. Everybody loves We Are the Champions.
Fat Bottom Girls. You're My Best Friend. Oh my gosh, there's so many.
Yeah, so they're definitely one to sure know that they definitely influenced a lot. And I think they even influenced some of the pop scene as well.
Oh, of course. And one thing that I personally want to add is I've always felt like they have the most unique guitar sound when it comes to their solos.
Yeah, Brian May is a brilliant guitarist. He's an amazing soloist, great guitarist, and I think that without his talent, I don't think... Yeah, sure, Freddie Mercury is definitely the powerhouse of the band, but mixed with Brian May's guitar, I really think that helped go forward with why they became so popular and successful.
Absolutely. But yeah, is there anything else you want to touch on with Queen, or should we move on?
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on.
All right. The next band we wanted to bring up and talk about was U2, because they are, well...
Well, the interesting thing about U2 is that U2 is one of those classic, timeless bands that still resonates with people today. I mean, they're still making music, and they're still super popular touring across the world. It's like they never grew out of the 80s. They just kept on adapting into the 90s, into the 2000s, into this decade. And this decade's almost over, and they're still a relevant band.
And they've really, they have changed, but they kind of haven't. They just took all the good sounds and all the good aspects of the 80s, and they brought it into the 90s, and then they took what they could from the 90s and brought it into the 2000s. And they just keep evolving, but they always evolve to become better, whereas a lot of bands do not. So they're like a fine wine. They've aged very well. And although some of their newer music isn't as popular as some of their older stuff, definitely still very relevant, very in the mainstream, and most people know about them or have heard their music before.
And if you haven't heard their music, I'm sure you have. I mean, just go on YouTube. I'm sure you'll find some song that they played that you've heard before, because their music is used a lot in movies too.
And we encourage you to check out these bands that we've mentioned if you've never heard of them, because in our opinion, they helped influence everything that you hear today. So,
and also that's the whole point of Transmitter, is to talk about music, and hopefully, we can learn new stuff and new artists and new songs. That we can expand in our horizons of music.
Yeah. So yeah, that's U2, and I think the reason we put them on this list, one of the main reasons, is just to show how well older music can age.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because you have people who are our age, they love U2, but U2, I know my dad likes the band U2 as well. I mean, like, that's two totally different generations who love the band U2.
Yeah. And next on our list is the Eagles, which they are actually, they came from, I believe they've been around since the late 60s, 70s?
Something around there. I think it was 67 or 65 when they started.
Yeah, I want to say 67. But yeah, they are an incredible band. If you've never heard the song Hotel California.
That's definitely one of their most iconic.
Yeah, and I mean, they use, there's the double guitar going. If you've never seen a live performance, like even if you've never looked one up on YouTube, please look it up and watch it, because it is incredible. You get the lead singer going with the guitar along with Joe Walsh, and it will blow your mind.
And don't they use a 12-string for the intro for Hotel California?
They do, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. 12-string guitars are awesome.
Yeah, and so, I mean, the Eagles, they deserve a spot here because they are definitely one of the most successful rock bands since the greats, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, and Joe Walsh by himself, he's considered a very influential guitarist as well.
Yeah, and I honestly had no idea just how influential Joe Walsh was. I've just recently been learning about him from a coworker at work, and it is incredible all that he has accomplished in his life and how much he has contributed to the Eagles' music. So definitely would encourage you guys to go and check out his solo work as well, because he does stuff with the guitar that is incredible.
And then the next band that we want to talk about, I would definitely, in my opinion, and anybody else's opinion is wrong, they're the pinnacle of metal music, and that is Metallica.
Oh yeah, they are so good. So much skill in that band, I mean.
I know, James Hetfield, and I'm starting to forget the other names, but...
Yeah, but they are incredible, and from the moment they touched their guitars and he picked up the mic, they have been amazing. Like, they...
Yeah, and they're still even popular and relevant to this day. I mean, they released an album a few years ago, Hardwired to Self-Destruct, and that became super popular. And like, I've even seen where they're James Hetfield, and I'm trying to remember the lead guitarist's name, and I'm kicking myself that I don't remember his name.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know either.
But anyways, he and the lead guitarist, they get invited to go and play a really cool rendition of the national anthem with their guitars. Like, there's no singing or anything, they just play the national anthem on guitar, and it's really cool. If you haven't seen it, just type in Metallica, the national anthem, and you can see them at football games, hockey games, things like that, and they'll just rockify the national anthem, and it's a really cool rendition and to the national anthem that they play.
Kirk Hammett.
I can't believe I forgot that. Kirk Hammett, yes.
Okay.
As a guitar player, I should know that.
Yeah, well, I had to look it up, so I am just as guilty as you are. But yeah, and they have some very, their Black album is so amazing. They have some iconic albums. They helped influence what metal is today. They kind of were a big part of what brought thrash metal into...
Oh yeah, because then eventually there was Megadeth.
Yeah, and into the mainstream. And yeah, when the first lead singer of Metallica broke off and created Megadeth, and then you had the two different, sides of the same coin where the sound was very similar. I definitely think that, and a lot of people are probably going to hate me for saying this, but I would think that Metallica has been more successful than Megadeth.
Oh, yeah, definitely, because Metallica is still relevant today.
Yeah, I mean, not saying that Megadeth isn't, but...
Well, you hear about Metallica and they collaborated with Lady Gaga like a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
You don't hear Megadeth collaborating with Ed Sheeran or anything like that.
No, not really. But I mean, I love some Megadeth songs, and I mean, they'll always have a special place in my heart too. Yeah, I do think that Metallica has been able to ride the wave a little better than Megadeth. Let's see, what else can you say about Metallica?
I mean, they have a lot of classic songs too. I mean, you have Enter Sandman, which is probably one of their most iconic heavy metal songs.
Yeah, or Nothing Else Matters. Which...
Yeah, I was just about to mention that.
Oh, sorry.
No, you can go ahead and talk about that, but yeah, they're not only just heavy metal, but they have very, soothing melodic songs too.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say about it. Nothing Else Matters is so kind of relaxing and soothing and has such a strong and deep meaning behind it. It's a very good song of theirs. If you haven't heard it, I would definitely check it out. But yeah, like even today, they just released an album not too long ago. They are still chugging along, and they still do things with the guitar that a lot of other musicians can't. So.
Yeah, because they're just incredible. Yeah.
Well, and they sound really good live still. I mean, they've aged a lot, and it surprises me how well they still sound, or how good they still sound. I mean, I think that they were just on, I want to say David Letterman, but I know he's not around anymore.
Maybe Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon.
I want to say Jimmy Kimmel. I think they were on the Jimmy Kimmel show.
Or Conan.
Yeah, I want to say Jimmy Kimmel, but I might be wrong. But yeah, they just did a live performance on there just a couple years ago, and it sounded amazing. It still sounded like they were young and
kicking, right?
Yeah, exactly. So let's see, anything else you want to say about Metallica? Or?
They're a great heavy metal band. If you haven't listened to them, definitely check them out. At least give some of their old stuff a chance if you don't like their newer stuff.
Yeah, and from there we would probably move on. The next one on our list here is Rush, which is an amazing band.
Oh yeah, I've never listened to them much, but I definitely recognize them as because they were just a very influential band when it comes to their music.
Yeah, and if you've never heard them, maybe you have and you just don't remember. If you look them up, the lead vocalist has a very high voice, very unique, and they really helped push progressive rock and progressive metal forward. They actually, I heard a story recently, and this is unconfirmed whether this is 100% accurate as for the band's come up and where they're from and everything, but I heard that they started in Canada, and here in the States, up in the northern states, they were being played on a radio station in Canada, and people up in the northern United States started hearing this amazing band that they didn't know the name of. They were actually catching the radio waves from Canada and hearing Rush play, and they started telling the radio stations here in the US, the radio producers, hey, you gotta get these guys on the radio because they are incredible. They're just amazing. And so eventually Rush started touring down in the States and became more and more popular. And yeah, the one thing that I would say that I would want to focus on with Rush is just how much they influenced the progressive side of things. They were kind of like Pink Floyd in that way, where they had a lot of skill and they used it to make new sounds that people hadn't heard before.
Yeah, for sure. And then going on from that, then you kind of get more into the 80s. And the 80s, and just in general for rock, is an amazing time for the genre of music because you have so many different great art that are considered some of the greats of rock and roll from that era. And one of them that we have on the list is Genesis and Phil Collins.
Oh yeah, incredible. They started off in Genesis, and Phil Collins eventually broke away and started doing some of his own solo stuff.
Yeah, although I know some people didn't like his solo stuff and they like Genesis better. But...
Yeah, there's a lot of confrontation when it comes to fans of Genesis. Genesis and Phil Collins
I
sometimes.
personally like both, but there are some people who are like, no, Phil Collins should have never done that. Like, I remember actually hearing a few years ago, Phil Collins was going to do like another solo album, and people were actually petitioning that he would not do that. I was like, you jerks.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, Phil Collins is amazing.
I don't know what happened with that, but I haven't heard any new solo album from Phil Collins, so I don't know if that petition really stopped him or not.
I doubt it did, but
yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
But yeah, so like there's some people they didn't like Phil Collins as a solo artist, but I think he did great. And I also like a lot of the music that he wrote for Disney too, with Tarzan and Brother Bear and those other Disney movies.
Oh yeah, particularly Tarzan for me was incredible. I mean, it's such a unique soundtrack. And
like for me, that music that I heard in Tarzan, I loved it, and I had no idea who he was. But that was kind of like my first taste of listening to Phil Collins. I'd never heard of Genesis or anything like that before that.
Yeah, so emotional and just gripping. We had Megadeth on here as well. We kind of touched on them and how they relate to Metallica. We have Journey, which, I mean, we could do a whole episode on Journey.
They were just so big and so popular. And one thing that I think is kind of interesting, Journey's still around today. I mean, like, I don't think they're writing new stuff, but they're still touring. But the lead singer, I forget his name. But
the new lead singer.
The new lead singer. It was crazy about him is that the new lead singer sounds exactly like the old singer.
He really does.
Yeah.
He does a pretty good job.
And the thing is, they just found him on YouTube, just doing covers of Journey songs, and they're like, "Whoa, he sounds exactly like I forget his name." Oh, and there you hear Ryan's dog.
Yeah, forgive us, please. That's my dog. He gets a little enthusiastic.
He's like, "I love Journey."
He agrees.
Yeah. But anyways, and they liked him enough that he's now, I think he's a permanent part of the band now.
Yeah, it's amazing, and so much talent. I think some of my favorite songs would have to be
Don't Stop Believing.
Well, of course, Separate Ways. I mean,
that's such an awesome song.
Yeah, I love that song. It really gets me pumped up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, could go on all day about Journey. So some other ones that we had on here were the Scorpions.
I've actually never listened much to them, so I don't know much about their music.
Oh yeah, the Scorps are great. I remember hearing stories. My mother used to tell me about how she used to listen to the Scorpions, and I personally really like a lot of their music.
And then of course there's the other staples like Foreigner and Styx and Bon Jovi.
Oh yeah. I mean, we could go on all day here.
And that's what I mean. Like the 80s is so chock full of so many amazing rock musicians and bands.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we probably won't mention all the ones that you guys want us to. But another big one that kind of influenced a lot of things was Elton John.
Oh yeah, I mean, like he actually has his own movie out, like they did for Queen as well. It's called Rocket Man. I haven't seen it, but.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like a musical, I believe, and I haven't seen it either, but yeah, he definitely deserves to be on this list, and I mean, he's done, gosh, what hasn't he done? I mean, he even did the soundtrack for El Dorado,
El Dorado and Lion King.
Yeah.
And although he did, though, at least Lion King he did with Tim Rice.
Yeah, and I mean, he actually, Nick just showed me this a week or two ago, but he actually had his own cover of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which I actually really like.
yeah, it was crazy. Like, I had no idea that he did that, but it was a really good cover of it.
Yeah, so, yeah, he deserves to be up there in my opinion, and, I guess at this point where we've talked about so much already, maybe we should just kind of sum up what we've talked about so far. Did you want to take that away, Nick? Or?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we started with Chuck Berry and how he kind of, just revolutionized the way the guitar was used and kind of led into rock and roll. Then with Elvis and breaking barriers with race and things like that, and also being kind of like an influencer when it come to being a TV personality and all that stuff. And then of course you have the Beatles, which were a huge influence on music just today, just because of how they wrote music and how popular they got. And of course the Rolling Stones and how they kind of led that revolution of being a rebel and all that with. And then, of course, there are other bands from the British invasion who we consider underrated, like The Who, and then Led Zeppelin being one of the very first heavy metal bands, and then Pink Floyd being influencing the progressive, psychedelic metal bands and perfecting the idea of the concept album. And then going into The Cure and the Pixies with the more punk scene, and then Queen and all the things that they did, kind of mixing all the new different sounds kind of between rock and pop, and then going into other bands like the Eagles and Metallica and Rush and all those other great 80s.
Yeah, U2, Genesis, Phil Collins. Then we get into the 80s where there's just a big congregation of amazing bands and amazing musicians.
So then of course also, that's when also hip hop and pop started to become kind of start to dominate the charts a little bit too, where rock kind of started getting its first competition.
Yeah, and I mean, rock music by this point had been around for decades, and so when you had these new people come in, like we talked about on our new metal episode with Run DMC and Aerosmith, where it was like two different cultures coming together and breaking through and busting through the barriers and creating that kind of new metal or hip-hop sound, but that helped bring hip-hop up as well. You know, you had like the Beastie Boys and yeah, Run DMC, so hip-hop started coming to life, and then you had more pop showing up on the chart. And in my personal opinion, I think at this point rock had been around for so long, people were just ready for
something new,
new and a new sound, and you had different cultures on the rise and more freedom for people to do things. Yeah, it was just a really great time for music, and I think that kind of sums everything up until the 80s pretty well.
Yeah, and then the 90s came and kind of everything just changed. You know, pop was pretty much king, pop and hip hop, but then of course, there have that one gem. You have Nirvana, you know, that was big. Like, Nirvana was one of the biggest bands to have come up probably since the Beatles, because like Nirvana almost had their same, because the Beatles, they had what was called Beatlemania, and Nirvana was probably the next band that had anything that closely was similar to the popularity and of the Beatles.
Yeah. Sorry, but one thing really quick before we get too much into grunge and Nirvana, because that is...
Well, there's a lot to cover on that, too.
Yeah, a huge part of what came up in the 90s. I just wanted to mention, when we talked about nu metal a couple episodes ago, the reason we had an episode specifically for nu metal was just to show how it was kind of, in a way, its own cornerstone in rock and roll, because you had the 80s, and then it led up to this...
It's like an awkward transition, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it had this transition from what was the 80s rock and roll sound into, you know, more hip-hop oriented, and you had grunge come up after. But without nu metal, we wouldn't have the music that we have today. And that's why we felt that it was so important to start with nu metal, even though it kind of is such a small piece.
The reason why we started with Linkin Park and then went into nu metal is because Linkin Park is an artist that influenced both Ryan and I, and so we could talk about that and then get started with Transmitter and talk about our musical background, so you can understand why we wanted to talk about this and why we're doing that, and it was something that we could share.
Yeah, so even though we aren't going to talk about it a whole lot, because we already kind of have, I mean, we talked about Linkin Park, we talked about the nu metal scene, we just wanted to rephrase really quick how important that piece of history was. I mean, not just because we grew up on it, but I mean, I genuinely do feel like it was a very important time of music, even though a lot of people kind of look down on it.
Yeah, it still boggles my mind that some people were saying that it was an embarrassment. It was like, no, I think it's great music. Yeah, but anyways, jumping into then what we had later with grunge. Grunge, it kind of just took the world by storm, because grunge is a genre of rock that came out of nowhere. It just started in Seattle, kind of started by Nirvana. Kurt Cobain, the frontman of Nirvana, he's considered the father of grunge, because he was so particular about what his sound was going to be. Like, he had a specific way of how he wrote his songs, and the drums had to be a specific sound. Like, I believe he went through, like, I think it was like 7 to 10 drummers before he decided to go with Dave Grohl as the drummer. Like, he had a very specific sound in mind, and that's why he's considered the father, because why it's considered a whole new different genre all by itself. It's not just because it's loud, you know, and sometimes the lyrics don't make sense or something like that, because the way that grunge song is written is a very particular science, I guess you could say. Because when you write a typical, like a very typical grunge song, like take Nirvana, which is considered, you know, the top or the pinnacle of grunge music, or the greatest song, you know, that Nirvana ever wrote, starts off with, you know, just a simple kind of dun 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 dun, and then, you know, you had the drums come to dun 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 dun, and then, you know, you had the heavy riff, and then once you get into the verse, when he starts singing, it's very soft guitar and very, you know, mellow drums and all that stuff, and then the bass as the lead during the verse, and then when you jump into the chorus, it turns into this big, huge, heavy guitar, heavy drums, and you're just going all out. Just go ahead and listen to Smells Like Teen Spirit. You'll hear that intro, and then, you know, with the soft verse, and then the heavy choruses, and then it repeats that again, and until the song ends, because it was such a particular way that Kurt Cobain wrote his music. It wasn't just writing random stuff. He had a very specific way of how he wrote his music.
Yeah, and I mean, grunge music, I feel like it kind of came up after nu metal, because nu metal was such a like angry and diverse sound, and then
grunge is too, but
it is, but in a way, grunge is more simplified. Like it's almost like pure raw emotion, and when I say simplified, it still is very complex. I mean, it's just different, and it really did take the world by storm. And Nirvana and the grunge scene, I mean, like Soundgarden,
Alice in Chains,
Alice in Chains,
Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah, there's so many just amazing grunge bands that are still around today, and people still love to listen to them.
And I really like that you brought up the simplicity, because that was another big thing, because when in a grunge song, you will not hear wild solos like you do in the 80s, like with Metallica or Megadeth or big, thrasher bands like that. You will not, I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you can still have solos in grunge, but they will be nowhere near like shredder music.
Yeah.
And that's another intricate part of grunge, is that's supposed to be simplistic.
Yeah, and so different from the 80s, where you had these very clean-cut, just eloquent solos, and grunge was a lot more dirty and, yeah, and like I said, very emotional and passionate. And
very raw.
Yeah. And grunge, it's the biggest thing since the Beatles, right?
At least one of them. I mean, like, yeah, not to say that the other bands didn't have their own crazes, but Nirvana had probably what was the closest to being like a mania since the Beatles.
Yeah.
Because, like, they were just a fish out of water when it came to all the other artists that were topping the charts. Like, you had, like, the Backstreet Boys or other, totally different artists that did not sound the same. And then you had Nirvana at the top of the charts.
Yeah, it's like, crazy.
They were all pop and R&B and hip-hop, and then you have Nirvana.
Yeah. Like, how did that happen? But, yeah, that just goes to show how influential they were, and definitely deserve to be on this list. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Dave Grohl and how he...
Dave Grohl. He's definitely a musical influence of mine. I'll let you say what you're going to say, but I definitely...
Well, no, actually, I think you should take it away, because, I mean, you know more about him than I do. I just know he went off and created what is the biggest rock band out there today.
Yeah, today, yeah. They are considered the biggest today. But yeah, Dave Grohl, he didn't grow up in Seattle. He grew up in Washington, D.C., but basically somebody who knew, I don't remember who, I remember watching this documentary about Nirvana and how Dave Grohl kind of joined the band. But basically, he loved punk music and would go to all these concerts and loved playing music. And basically, he heard about Kurt Cobain, and this was before Nirvana was even signed or anything big. But I guess he just had a hunch, and he dropped out of high school, traveled all the way to Seattle and joined Nirvana. And wasn't long very after that Nirvana blew up, and they were touring all over the country, if not the world.
Yeah. And then, I mean, after the tragic passing of Kurt Cobain, he, I think he took a couple years hiatus.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, because they became a very close-knit group of friends with Kurt Cobain, Dave Grohl, and Kirst Novoselic, the bassist. Mm-hmm. They were a very tightly knit, close group of friends. And then with the tragic passing of Kurt Cobain, one of your best friends, he dies.
Yeah.
Tragically. And so, he took a few years, and then he decided to form the Foo Fighters. And then you have like some of his earlier classics, like Everlong, all that stuff. And slowly but surely, Foo Fighters became what is considered today's the greatest rock band out there today.
And I mean, some cool things about Dave Grohl. He actually is considered, I think he's even called Humble Dave by a lot of people.
He is such a down-to-earth person. I mean, like, yeah, sure, he swears and all that stuff. And so some people are like, oh, well, he sings like a crass person. But no, when you watch interviews, seems like the nicest, most coolest down-to-earth person. And he cares so much about the shows when he goes to perform. Like, I don't remember what country he was in, but a few years ago back, he was on stage, and while he was just getting into the song, he fell off stage and broke his leg.
Yeah, I remember this story. Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, great, the concert's over. The lead singer and guitarist just broke his leg. And like, I remember watching the video, and you hear Dave Grohl, he's kind of like out of it because probably the immense pain. He's like, I think I just broke my leg, and he says, don't worry guys, I will be back. And I remember watching another interview where Taylor Hawkes, the drummer, he was like, I thought we were done. I thought we were all going to get to go home. home, and that was it for the concert, because Dave Grohl kind of leads the entire concert, and all the rest of the musicians just follow his lead. It's like, well, Dave's gone, what are we going to do? But Dave Grohl wanted them to continue the concert, and like, okay, we'll try our best. And then, a few hours later, after, he's in the cast and all that stuff, Dave Grohl is insistent, despite what the doctors wanted him to do, to not perform anymore. He convinces some of the EMTs, or what they're called, the people who ride in the ambulances.
Yeah.
He convinces to come out, put a stool for his leg to sit on, and the EMT holds his foot on that while he sits on a chair, and Dave Grohl completes the 3-hour concert. After he was probably heavily on pain meds, and continues the concert.
Yeah.
Because he's like, those people, they were all looking forward to this concert. They took time off work, or they spent a lot of money to be there, and then we're not providing that product for them. People have difficult and stressful lives, and this is something that they love and want to get away from the world and enjoy themselves. And Dave Grohl understands that, and like, he wanted to give what the people wanted. And then eventually, because he broke his leg, so it had to heal for quite a few months. And since Dave Grohl is so freaking rich from Nirvana, because Nirvana made absolutely millions, so Dave Grohl is super rich and well off just from Nirvana alone. He spared no expense, and he made this huge giant throne for him to sit on top and play while his leg was still healing.
Yeah, he is incredible. He's an amazing guy, and just so humble and down to earth. Everybody loves him. I look up to the guy.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy. Like, I remember there was this other video I saw where he's in the middle of one of their harder songs, and he's just playing. All of a sudden, he just stops the entire band, and he singles out this one guy who's literally pushing, and like punching these other people in the concert. And he's like, we don't tolerate that kind of behavior here. Get the F out of my concert. Because, this guy was hurting other people on the floor. It's like, we don't tolerate that kind of thing. He looks out for all the people who come to hear him sing his music, that they have a good time. If he sees someone who is ruining somebody else's experience for them, he will single them out, get the whole crowd against them, and kick him out of the show.
Yeah, and I mean, let's see. He's also been known to fill in for other bands' drummers when they have been sick or unable to drum. He's still an amazing drummer even to this day.
Oh yeah, I personally consider him one of the greatest drummers to have ever lived.
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt. What else can you say? Oh, I guess we could tell you a little bit about the Foo Fighters. The name Foo Fighters is actually reference to it back in like World War I, World War II. The jet fighters, when they were flying around, they would see these lights, like these flashes of lights moving around very quickly, and they almost look like UFOs, and they became to be known as Foo Fighters. Anyway, that's one of the things that title for the band stems back to, and I don't know if they necessarily, there may be a whole nother reason why they actually named it the Foo Fighters, but
well, they named it after those British planes. So.
Yeah. So yeah, that's some information on Nirvana and grunge, and let's see,
and just the awesomeness of Dave Grohl. So.
Yeah, and the Foo Fighters, and that's the rock music that is still around today and is the most popular rock band.
Yeah, and then there's other popular versions of rock that are just more than just the Foo Fighters, but they just more dominate the rock charts rather than the top 100 charts like the Foo Fighters do. Because then you have after Kurt Cobain tragically passed, then you have other bands that came after, like Puddle of Mud, and then other bands that you and I like to listen to, like the post-grunge scene, 3 Days Grace, Breaking Benjamin, Seether, and other rock bands like that, or Rage Against the Machine, or just lots of other great bands that we listened to in the early 2000s.
Yeah, they kind of drew on that grunge type sound. I mean, at least with post-grunge, you know, like 3 Days Grace, I would say Seether as well, drew on that grunge sound. One band that wasn't on this list that I feel like we should talk about them a little bit is Nickelback. Just because...
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they are considered one of the top-selling acts.
Yeah, and they are grunge, and I mean, a lot of people have mixed feelings about them, but I mean, you can't deny that they have, I mean, so many people go to their concerts.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think it's so weird, like, people like, Nickelback, I hate Nickelback. There's, like, a huge, like, I guess you could say, following.
Fan base, yeah.
No, following that hates Nickelback. They're considered the most hated, successful group in music history.
Which is so weird, because aren't they on, like, the Rock Hall of Fame?
Yeah, they are. They're considered the most hated, successful.
Yeah, it's so strange. But yeah, so I mean, that kind of is a little bit of what grunge music is about. And I don't know, is there anything else that we want to add as far as...
I mean, then also another big thing in the 2000s more than just post-grunge is the alternative scene.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I guess we should also talk about, industrial and funk and alternative, because, like, you had funk bands or funk rock bands like Rage Against the Machine, which you talked about a little bit ago, or industrial type bands with, like, Nine Inch Nails and, Trent Reznor. I mean, he definitely deserves to be talked about here. He's a brilliant musician.
Yeah.
And definitely uses aspects of rock as well as other genres of music. Alternative and yeah, getting into almost like indie music and indie rock.
And then, of course, the punk scene with, like, My Chemical Romance or Blue October, more the emo phase, I guess you could call it.
yeah, or I mean, even like Fall Out Boy is considered punk rock, at least their early stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They've changed a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, all of that is kind of still in the mixing pot today, and it'll be interesting to see how music evolves from here. I know one band that I really like that kind of uses, they have like an 80s sound along with alternative and indie, and that's the 1975. I feel like they're a great kind of like, I don't know if you would call them 80s pop, but they're like a pop band today that I think is doing really well. Yeah, you've got the Foo Fighters that are holding up rock and roll.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And Metallica is still out there. U2 is still out there, like we talked about.
And then others like Breaking Benjamin, 3 Days Grace. You've got Saint Asonia that's coming out with a new album.
Oh my gosh,
Adam
Saint
Gontier.
Asonia. Like, a lot of people don't know who Saint is. Like, who the heck is Saint Asonia? So 3 Days Grace, I'm pretty sure I said this before, but I'll say it again. They're my all-time favorite band. Like, when I first heard them back in like 2006-ish, I just fell in love with their music. And the lead singer, his name is Adam Gontier. He left 3 Days Grace in early 2013, and he still had a record label with I forget which record label that 3 Days Grace was with before, because they're with somebody different now, but Adam Gontier still had a contract with him, and so he got to write another album. So he got the guitarist from Stained, Mike Mushok, and then he got Corey Lowry of Eye the Empire on bass, and then he got Rich Bedo from, my gosh, I can't believe I'm forgetting the name. They're another popular group. They're the ones who sing Paralyzed. I'm just paralyzed. To be struck by you.
11.
Finger 11.
Finger
yeah.
11,
Yes,
thank you.
There we go. Yeah, and so they got the drummer from Finger 11. And some people considered them a supergroup because they were all part of successful popular bands, but they just said, no, we don't like that term, supergroup. But anyways, they got together and wrote the first Saint Asonia record, and now they actually do have a different lineup because Rich Bedo and Corey Lowry have left, and so they've got Cale Gontier, I think his name is, Adam's cousin, who's also the bassist for Art of Dying, and then they also brought in the drummer from Art of Dying as well, and so along with those two, with Mike Bushok and Adam Gontier, is the current lineup for Saint Asonia, and they just released their latest single on July 24th, which is called The Hunted, featuring Soli Arna of Godsmack. And
Such a good song.
It's so awesome. I've been listening to it on repeat for the last few days. Like, I just absolutely love it. And I'm so excited to hear the new album and what they have to bring out.
Yeah, and I don't know if you had already said, but just so our listeners know, 3 Days Grace is still around, and the singer from My Darkest Days is now singing for them, is he a family member of Adam Gontier as well? Or
No, he's not.
Just a good friend?
No. So where Matt Walsh came from is the bassist for 3 Days Grace is, I can't believe I'm forgetting names. I'm forgetting so many names.
It's okay. I'm having the same problem.
Brad Walsh is the bassist for 3 Days Grace, and Matt Walsh is his brother.
Oh, okay. So that's where
the new lead singer for 3 Days Grace is the brother of the bassist, who also happened to be the lead singer of My Darkest Days, which is no longer around.
Ah, gotcha.
Because right at the time, My Darkest Days was having a bit of a hiatus because of, I guess, contentions in the group. And right before 3 Days Grace was going to go on tour with their album, The Transit of Venus, Adam Gontier just up and left the band. And so they're like, it's a few days before we're supposed to go on tour. And I guess it was just a stroke of luck that the bassist was meeting with his brother before we go on tour. And he knew that My Darkest Days wasn't doing things, like, what are you doing for the next few months? And so they thought, we'll just have you as a temporary, as the lead vocalist as we go on tour. But then they just decided to stick with him because he was such a good match, and I guess good camaraderie and chemistry with 3 Days Grace. Because Matt Walsh was also there from the beginning of 3 Days Grace as well. Like, he actually helped co-write some of the songs from their self-title as well. Like, if you go and look on 3 Days Grace self-title on 3 Days Grace, he helped co-write the song Scared.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah, and I mean, we are definitely going to have to do or not an album, an episode on 3 Days Grace and their whole evolution and everything.
Well, I could talk about them forever. So
yeah, and I mean Nick knows so much about them, and I will definitely learn something on that episode. I know too when we do it. So stay tuned for that. And then I guess as long as we're throwing in some favorites, I would want to mention.
No, sorry, only my favorites.
Oh, okay. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. This is gonna be it for today. No, Maynard James Keenan from Tool is definitely one of my favorites, and I feel like Tool is a very good progressive rock / metal band. But Maynard James Keenan, he is also in A Perfect Circle as well as Pucifer.
I didn't know he was in A Perfect Circle.
Yeah, he's actually the vocalist in that band, and that's another super group too. I mean, you've got I believe it's the old Smashing Pumpkins guitarist in that band, as well as some other top tier names. We'll definitely have to do an episode on them, but yeah, I love their music. I mean, Tool, A Perfect Circle, any of those bands, absolutely love them. But yeah, I feel like that is a pretty good, being as brief as we can be.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good history of like the origins of rock and how it has changed the climate of today.
So we hope you learned something new and that we touched on at least something that everybody likes, and that you'll forgive us if we didn't talk about somebody who you didn't think we touched about that we should have. Let us know. Reach out to us. Leave a voice message or an email and tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, and maybe there's a band that we could talk about in the future that we didn't touch on today.
Yeah, and I mean, if we missed out on talking about a band that you feel like should be on this list, message us and let us know, and we would love to do more episodes on whatever you guys want us to talk about. Leave us messages on Facebook, Instagram. I mean, we're on pretty much all social media at this point, and on all podcast platforms for the most part. So
yeah, there's the history of rock and roll in a nutshell by Ryan and Nick, and we hope you guys join us next time.
Yeah, also we don't really have a topic for the next episode yet. I mean, we have lots of topics that we're thinking about using for an episode, but we're still kind of deciding. So like I said, leave us a message if you want us to talk about something specific. If not, we will
we'll just ramble. So.
Yeah, we'll just ramble and choose a topic of our own. Is there anything else that we should leave these guys with today?
I think that's it, man.
All right, well, have a good night, everybody, or day, or whatever time you're listening to this, and we will see you guys in the next episode, and we really appreciate all of you, so thank you.
Bye-bye.